I wanted to give a warm welcome back to Dr. Kimberley, our resident naturopathic doctor who has been working for us at Mount Trek for over 5 years. Not this last little COVID bump, but she's still hanging in there with us. She has a regular practice of her own, and she's joining us this week to talk about 3 things: food allergies, food intolerances, and food sensitivities, because it's hard to tease all of that out and get a sense of where am I with what I'm eating and how is that food supporting me or not? Have I been living with a bit of duress and I haven't been noticing what it's doing to me? Or do I want to experiment with my diet a little bit and try maybe pulling a couple things out and see if it gives me more energy or better digestion? So Kimberly's here to help tease apart the science a bit for us to be able to understand the differences between those types of food interactions, and also to talk about some of the symptoms that we can notice in ourselves, and then also talk about what can we do about it? How can we find out more information so that we can tweak our own nutrition to meet our personal body's best needs? Because there's no use wasting energy. We might as well be getting the correct food that isn't taxing our immune system, our hormonal system, and putting us under slight duress, basically making us out of balance, a little bit in dis-ease. And that's what'll happen if we're putting certain things into ourselves that we're not designed to eat. And we're all different. Every one of us is in a different body. We have different genetics. We have different blood types. We have different ways of using food. And we need to adjust and tweak all our life, really, because things change as we age, to make sure we're eating the best things for our body, for us, and our brain. So without further ado, Dr. Kimberley, maybe you would want to just talk a little bit about what's the difference between an allergy and how that affects our system compared to an intolerance, compared to what we might call a food sensitivity.
Yeah, definitely. And hi, everyone. It's great to see so many faces here and such a good turnout as always for these calls. As a naturopathic doctor, I just want to start out by saying, as I've said on the other calls that I've been on, that there is so much power in what we look at through food. So think about you're eating at least 3 times a day for most of us, and there's so much power, again, to choose what's, I always say, fueling our body instead of fooling our body. And it can be really easy to, unfortunately, kind of be fooled and to think that we are eating a healthy diet that's really serving us, but it can be really, really tricky to know kind of how the foods that we're eating on a day-to-day basis are affecting our body if we're not having a systematic way of looking at it and teasing that apart. So that's what I hope that you kind of learn and understand in today's call. And so to set the stage on that front, there's a lot of confusion always in regards to, as Kirkland said, what is a food allergy? What is an intolerance? What is an allergy sensitivity, and how do those differ? And so the way that I find people best understand it is first to know that sensitivities and intolerances are not allergies. So when I'm first working with patients and tell them I suspect they could have a type of reactivity or a sensitivity going on with foods, often they don't think that's the case because they're thinking of it like an allergy. So if you think of that peanut or shellfish reaction, that's what people are most familiar with. So in that case, what is happening is you're eating a food and your body is recognizing that as something foreign it doesn't want there, and you're having an immediate, fast-acting immune response. And so with a food allergy, again, usually soon after eating, within 30 minutes, often right after, and the types of symptoms that you're going to experience are things like hives, itchiness, you can get wheezing, swelling of your lips, you can have a full-blown anaphylactic reaction. And that is very different than what happens with a food sensitivity. And so with a food sensitivity, what is occurring is your body is still having an immune response, but it is much more delayed and much more gradual, and it produces a completely different type of symptoms. And so The symptoms that are produced by food sensitivities can take up to 72 hours to reach a peak. And often people are eating foods that they're sensitive to every day without really suspecting them to be at the root cause, again, because of this gradual buildup. It's like a cause of gradual and chronic inflammation and immune reactivity. So it sneaks up on you, and you're not noticing symptoms per se that are better or worse right after you're eating, because you're usually having these things. They're often common foods, which we'll dive into more soon. But you're not noticing that reactivity in that same way as an allergy. And so immune response, but different. And then a food intolerance is basically when you're unable to digest something about that food, and that's what's causing the problem. So that's lactose. Lactose intolerance is the best example of that. And so with a lactose intolerance, you're not able to digest and break down the sugars in dairy, and that causes digestive issues. But there can also be a dairy sensitivity where you're having immune reactivity to the proteins in the dairy products. So even if you're choosing lactose free, you can still have the symptoms that I'll loop back around and talk on shortly here.
Thanks, Kimberly, for teasing that out. Just a quick reminder, everybody, Alex is there for any chats that come up. So anything that Kimberly's talking about that stimulates a question for you, don't hesitate to throw it in the chat, and then Alex can offer it up for Kimberly's advice. So, because you might as well get what you can out of her right now, because we're all individual, and you've probably all tried different things and had suspicions about different things, and you might as well get a few answers out of this chat together.
Yes.
So there's a couple of things you mentioned there, Kimberly. In an allergy and sometimes in sensitivities, there's our immune system gets involved. And what I kind of hear is an allergy is like having a forest fire. It's more acute. And a sensitivity is more like just having a slow burn, just a small fire that's constantly burning and creating a little heat in the system and maybe a little inflammation, but it's taxing us. It's robbing us of energy. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And so I often use the analogy of if your body had two different armies. With an allergy, it's that first line of defense. The job of that army is keeping the invader out. And then with the sensitivity, it's the background mission. It's the playing the long game. And so when we chronically have something in and that army's chronically needing to be active, our resources basically get depleted. We have ongoing inflammation and issues going on because of the ongoing warfare that our body is having to contend with and having all of that immune reactivity. And so with that, we can see symptoms coming up. And this is where things are quite variable and individualized. There can be genetic components, other health factors that are linking into what we see as symptom presentation, but it can be really basic things that people experience every day without really thinking that their diet is causing that. And so that can be fatigue, brain fog, feeling joint pain, feeling achy in your body, sinus congestion, chronically clearing your throat, especially after meals, headaches, migraines, lowered immune function. So if you feel like you get sick with every cold or flu, then that can be something that's chronically taxing your immune system and depleting its resources from where it should actually be reserving them for. Digestive issues, of course, that's where food is being digested and absorbed. So anything like irritable bowel syndrome, so whether that's more loose stools, gas, bloating, or even constipation, especially with dairy, I find that can be a common symptom. And so those are just a few of the things. There can be a number of other pieces coming up, but fatigue, bloating, joint pain, any kind of bowel issues, that I'm always wanting to rule out food sensitivities as a contributor to that.
What about skin, Kimberly? Because it's our largest eliminatory organ. It often will show up when it's under duress too, right?
Yes, I can't believe I missed that one. That is a really common symptom that can be produced by food sensitivities. So especially eczema, Whenever I see a patient with eczema, I'm looking for possible dietary triggers. As with anything, there's other causes that can link in and contribute to this as well. So often there's a handful of things that might be leading to any symptoms that you're experiencing. I always, well, not always, but when I'm working with patients, I explain that when we're looking at the presentation of your symptoms, there's usually multiple underlying causes. And if you picture it like stacking blocks, each different cause is a block, and it's not until we cross this invisible threshold that these blocks start tumbling over, and that's you experiencing symptoms. If we can pull out a few of the boxes, so maybe one of them is sensitivity to some foods that you're eating, maybe another one is stress, maybe there's some bacterial imbalances in your gut and nutrient deficiencies. There can be a number of different pieces, but food, I find, especially in these scenarios, can drive a lot of that. And exactly as you said, skin is a detox organ. And so we see that coming into play there too.
Kimberly, is there a common list that when we talk about it with Jen, our nutritionist, we talk about the sour eight as common foods that, because of the intensity of the way they're being grown or the amount that we're eating of these foods, the overall intensity for some of us in terms of being able to digest it regularly at high volumes can be common foods that create an immune response, or even maybe bump into the intolerances. Can you mention a couple of the ones that you find through your practice that are common?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the most common two that definitely don't impact everyone, but present the most frequently are the classic two. So gluten containing grains. So gluten containing grains include especially wheat, but rye, barley, and spelt as well. And then dairy. So milk, cheese, cream, sour cream. I think the important thing to say, and at this point too, because that's often foods that are major staples for people and that they like and crave, is that identifying your food sensitivities does not mean you can never have these things. It means that you're in control and you know what kind of symptoms they're creating, how much they're potentially dragging you down. And then often that we can find a bit of a balance, which varies for people. But going back to the common triggers, those two are quite common. Other foods that can be common issues can include eggs, corn, soy, nuts, even, especially sometimes for things like eczema. I can see issues with, let's say, almonds or cashews. There's a different type of sensitivity that can come in, which is more of a chemical sensitivity, and nightshade vegetables and citrus can present with that. So nightshade vegetables include potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, so bell peppers, red peppers, hot peppers, and eggplant. And then goji berries fall into that too. And I find, especially if somebody has more chronic pain, joint pain, stiffness, headaches, migraines, that is one thing that I am curious about. There tends to be a bit of a genetic predisposition, and that one can be really sneaky. It tends to be dose dependent, but we'll loop back around and we'll talk on how you can figure that out. But that can be really common. And then citrus, more so if somebody is having more hives, sometimes more sinus issues, sometimes citrus is a problem. I'm sure I've missed a couple in there, but that's a number of the main ones that I tend to be looking for.
And what about things that are in everything, like say sugar? They may not be a sensitivity or an intolerance or an allergy, but do they cause just some digestive stress that then, like you say, in the building blocks of trouble, could be part of that building block system, or even alcohol, where we're putting the system under stress to metabolize it?
Yes, and that links in as well to an important point, is what causes food sensitivities. And so while sugar and alcohol aren't as common for being that protein-based immune trigger, they drive inflammation and they affect your gut. And so we can get bacterial imbalances, so what I call dysbiosis, imbalances in gut bacteria, overgrowth of yeast. Alcohol can affect the permeability of the lining of our gut. So when we dive down and look at the anatomy of the small intestine, which is where your food is being digested and absorbed. The lining of that is only 1 cell thick. So I'm going to use my hands and give you that example that if these are cells, the connections between them is really important. If it's too loose, we can have incompletely digested proteins traveling into the bloodstream. And it's that exactly that precipitates this whole immune reaction. So if your immune system is seeing incompletely digested proteins, it doesn't know, is that a virus? Is that a bacteria? And so that's where we get this ongoing cleanup mission coming in with that that kind of background army, and that's then what drives the symptoms. So some of those pieces that are just more inflammatory from a dietary standpoint can set us up to have similar of that classic immune reactivity going on.
Thank you. Maybe we should just take a little pause here and see if Alex has any questions he wants to throw out, because you've given so much information.
For sure.
Yeah. Directly related to what you were just saying about inflammation, does it relate to leaky gut?
There we go. So what I was just talking about there is what we call leaky gut syndrome. So that's the more common name, medically referred to as intestinal hyperpermeability. So there's too much that's able to pass through into the bloodstream without being completely digested. And exactly that. And so that can cause that immune reactivity against foods, and then that can set up inflammation too. And actually, I just remembered a point before we go to the next question that I wanted to mention when I was talking about that. That's why some of those foods like gluten, dairy, eggs, corn, soy are such common food sensitivities, is the proteins are a little bit more difficult to break down, and they are a huge part of the kind of standard North American diet. So if we're going to be reacting to anything when we have this leaky gut issue going on, it tends to be the foods that we're eating most often that are more difficult to break down.
Right. So in that vein, would considering variety be a good way to reduce inflammation, or vice versa? If you don't have variety, does that cause inflammation?
Both, yes. And so for me, step one is always clarity. So the more we can get clarity on what currently is driving your symptoms and causing that inflammation, initially it's helpful to avoid those more comprehensively so that we can decrease how much your immune system is on guard with that particular food or protein. But beyond that point, varying in these foods so that you're not getting this one ingredient all the time is really helpful to prevent it from, again, becoming more of an issue. And then diversifying your diet completely, bringing in different grains. So not only having wheat, bringing in some of there's great gluten-free grains, and you don't have to be fully gluten-free to be able to bring them in. So whether that's something like brown rice or millet or amaranth or buckwheat, there's so many really good options. And then if we're not having these mono diets, really where we're having the same food all the time, that can minimize reactivity for sure.
We've got a long list of questions that I think I could group into very personal. So I'm going to read you some of these questions, and then I have a question myself of, do these questions have a broader topic to discuss, which is how personal are food sensitivities, and then how do you identify the ones for you, and then possible unique solutions for yourself. So I'm going to read you a few of these questions.
Sure.
Can certain foods exacerbate and or change arthritis progression? Mm-hmm. Can a histamine reduced food diet help reduce skin allergies like hives? Are there certain foods that we should eat to avoid allergies? Can an almond sensitivity make you feel nauseated? So I'm hearing a theme kind of that to me seems very unique to the person who's asking these. Are you hearing something similar? And then can you touch on that?
Yeah. So I think that there is a lot of crossover with all of that. Again, it does point out that the symptoms people experience do tend to be really individualized, and two people can be sensitive to almonds and have a completely different presentation. One person might have eczema, the other might have headaches. And so, going back, definitely again, if we can minimize that trigger, if your immune system's not having the presence of that food, it's not inciting that whole immune reaction that's then leading to inflammation and causing everything downstream. And often there's also an element of looking at the other factors. For me, the longer I practice, the more I realize food is 100% really important, and that I would say food sensitivities are more common than not. And the people that I'm treating who are usually presenting with these types of symptoms, fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, maybe joint pain, headaches, I find that when we look at personalizing their diet, it's a big driver. And then beyond that, we can help to reduce food reactivity going forward by pulling out some of those other blocks that I was talking about. So if there is dysbiosis, so there's imbalance in your gut bacteria, maybe you're always eating when you're stressed, like you're on the go at work, or there's stress at the dinner table, or you're drinking a lot of water or other beverages when you're eating, which maybe you're thinking is a really healthy thing to do, but that can be actually diluting your digestive enzymes and making it more difficult to digest those proteins. So it's also about looping in those other factors, maybe bringing in some digestive enzyme support, so that when you do have those foods, we're minimizing symptoms. I'm not all or none. Some people do, when they uncover that they're reacting to certain foods, realize it's not worth it to bring it in, and they just feel better avoiding it fully. Their symptoms are intense when they have it. They're glad to have the clarity and they don't want to eat those things. Others, it's milder. It's more of a dose-dependent nature. And with that, we can work a lot with dialing in what you're doing most days and still having freedom for the pizza out or whatever it might be.
Kimberly, maybe we could look at the ways that we can test ourselves to see whether we have an allergy, sensitivity, or intolerance, and in through those different methods, whether there's one you'd recommend more than others?
Yes, 100%. So there's two main methods I find very useful in my practice to identify food sensitivities. One is blood testing for those antibodies that I mentioned. I didn't really go into detail on the antibodies, but we can test for the types of antibodies that are present with that food sensitivity reaction. So delayed immune reactivity, we can do a blood test that is looking at that. It's not perfect. However, it can be really, really helpful for giving us a blueprint and knowing what's going on that front. I'm going to loop back once I talk about the second method, and then we can talk on pros and cons of each. So basically, blood testing is one method, and then approaching things from a dietary standpoint is method number two. And there's different ranges or spectrums to which we can take that. Doing an elimination diet is the most comprehensive approach. And basically what that entails is cutting out all of the most common food sensitivities for a short period of time. So I will do that for as little as 11 days. Believe it or not, that can be a long enough window for people to notice dramatic improvement, especially if we're looking at things like fatigue and irritable bowel syndrome and headaches. Well, a lot of the symptoms, but something autoimmune in nature that's maybe more chronic can take a little bit more time. But we clear the slate by cutting out all the food sensitivities, seeing how much things change, and then assuming you've noticed a significant improvement in your symptoms. From there, we're testing in the foods that we'd eliminated one at a time to identify how they affect you, if they're driving symptoms. And that's actually my preferred method. I'm sure you're all hearing this and preferring the blood test because it sounds easy. After doing this for almost 10 years with people, a lot of my patients actually prefer doing an elimination diet as well, because you get to feel the change. We can also do a combined approach, and again, I'll talk on the pros and cons of each, but there's nothing better really when it comes to this than seeing symptoms that you might be experiencing chronically go away or significantly improve in a short period of time just by working on things on a dietary front, and then really clearly identifying specifically what symptoms maybe come back with different foods and how quickly. So then we know how to structure things going forward. And it's really interesting because sometimes different foods will cause totally different symptoms for people. So maybe corn is an issue and that's driving your eczema, and nightshades are a problem and that's causing migraines. And so we get more clarity with that. Only like the downside with an elimination diet is we can't take all foods out of your diet, nor do we want to. And that's where the blood testing alongside can be really helpful to make sure we're not missing anything. The downside with the blood testing is that it picks up the immune reactions, not the chemical sensitivities. So if you have a sensitivity to nightshades or to citrus, something more from that standpoint, we're not going to see that on the blood test. Also, if your gut is having a lot of inflammation and there's a lot of that leaky gut syndrome going on, we can actually see a lot of reactivity on the food sensitivity report that's maybe not as representative as your actual most prominent food sensitivities. So without getting too technical, in a perfect world, I love looking at both approaches for people. I often in my practice will initially do a blood test for food sensitivities, get them started on an elimination diet before we have the results, follow up 2 weeks later when they're 2 weeks into the diet, see how much things have changed. If anything has come up on the food sensitivity report that we haven't taken out of their diet, we can do a quick adjustment. And then otherwise it just guides us what to test in first. But I also do a lot of just food sensitivity testing or just elimination diets. At the end of the day, the important thing is looking at it, looking at your diet, and in some way trying to gain some clarity as to how different foods are affecting you there.
How are you
Kimberley,
measuring this?
when you do an elimination diet with somebody, is a big component using mindfulness techniques like journaling, for example, so that we can really notice after a meal how we feel, that we're and looking for symptoms and tracking different variables, either physically or mood wise or energy wise or sleep wise, so that we can really see if there's been a change or not?
Yeah, so I do so many of these that I have an online program with recipes, meal plans, ingredient guides, and as part of all of that, I have symptom questionnaires, both like daily food log trackers with prompts as far as what types of symptoms you're looking for to make notes on, and then weekly so we can see the progression over time. And so definitely it is a process that you want to, it's a good experiment, or a good experiment, let's say, in tuning into your body and watching for that. Because a lot of people, myself in the past included, I was probably the most skeptical person when I started my naturopathic schooling about the whole concept of food sensitivities. It didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't until kind of experiencing that personally and seeing like my eczema and fatigue, brain fog, bloating that I didn't even actually realize I had until it went away. Seeing that shift through an elimination diet really connected me with kind of watching what was going on in my body. I was just more unconscious about it before and thinking, well, this is just normal. Like everyone must be tired, otherwise coffee wouldn't be so popular. So yes, it takes tuning into that and having some guidance on what you're looking for.
Kimberley, in addition to eliminating foods, are you also prescribing your clients supplements? Is there a combination of the two?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So depends on the individual, but I would say 90% of the time, if I'm doing an elimination diet, I make very little changes other than that, because I like to treat it as a science experiment, minimize the variables that we're changing, and look at what happens when we just change your diet. And that's it. And then from there, we get a lot of insights based on the degree of the change. So let's say we just change your diet and fatigue is a main cause of that, and you go from a 2 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10 energy in 2 weeks, we're on the right track. If things are shifting more subtly, that's maybe when we're doing some more investigations, bringing in some supplements to help to support other pieces that might be going on. If I'm looking at treating leaky gut, I will often bring in supplements as part of that, so treating some of the other factors. But when I'm doing an elimination diet, typically not during that.
Kimberly, when I was a kid, we used to go to the doctor and they would put all of these pricks into our skin, and then they'd put pollen in and different food things and everything. And is that system of testing allergies and sensitivities still used?
It is, but I'm glad you brought that up because it's testing something different. So the skin prick testing is not testing for food sensitivities. It is testing for allergies. And so, yes, relevant, but different. It's testing for that immediate immune response, not the delayed one that's really the sneakier piece. And so for that, blood testing is what we'd be looking at. You can't actually test very well for allergies via blood testing, because not only like that reaction's really fast, but then the immune reaction reduces. It goes back down really quickly. So if you haven't just had an allergic reaction, we're not going to see that on testing. Versus food sensitivity testing is the opposite. Those antibodies produced, so that immune reactivity can persist for months. Even if you haven't recently had the food, it'll decrease over time, but it makes it a lot easier for us to look at it on blood testing. I actually also wanted to comment too. I know sometimes like doing an elimination diet, cutting out everything at once can sound overwhelming. Again, usually what I find once people, if they have guidance and have a blueprint, it's a lot more straightforward than they think. Basically what it's stripped down to is it's a really clean diet. If you've ever done anything kind of like a cleanse, a detox, it's kind of similar to that in the first phase. So if you're not vegetarian, basically what you're eating is meat, fish, vegetables other than the nightshades, fruit other than citrus, and seeds I still keep in as part of it. And we can actually make a ton of food with that, but it takes creativity. Again, which is why I did end up putting together like the protocol that I did, so it's not that additional stressor for people. But there are intermediate ways. Like we can start by doing just gluten-free, dairy-free, and seeing how that goes. The drawback with that is, let's say gluten is an issue, and we'll just use almonds again. Almonds are an issue, and you do the gluten-free, dairy-free trial. But as part of the dairy-free, you change to almond milk, you change to almond yogurt, and we can basically not see a shift. So even though gluten was a problem, we don't tune into it because you have something else in your diet that's still driving inflammation and still causing those symptoms. So it's actually, even though it's more of a deep dive, initially it's actually much faster, and we get much more information and avoid missing things by just doing that whole protocol out the gate, because we're not kind of chasing our tail, missing things and just changing out one food sensitivity for another.
It seems like everyone should go through this process, Dr. Kimberley. So what are some of the common hurdles that you see prevent people from doing this? Is it intimidation of the time element, or is it a financial investment? What's keeping everyone from having done this process?
I think food's a really emotional thing, for one. I think that it's a comfort. It's also like really, it's so interesting because the foods that people are sensitive to is often the foods that they're craving, because it's causing a cortisol response. When you have them, so many of us are chronically stressed, our adrenal glands are taxed, our cortisol's out of whack. And so we eat these foods that are causing inflammation, and we get this positive feedback response through getting this cortisol. And so it feels uncomfortable to look at it. And again, I know because I've been there, that was me, like full on. I completely get it. And so it's the decision-making process, the deciding I'm going to do this. Once people have started, honestly, it's easy. And I've worked with probably well over 1,000 people doing this specific protocol now at this point. So I've seen it time and time again. It's the commitment to it that feels hard, because we have to give up these things that are like our staples, the comforts. And so once we commit and we're in, it becomes much easier. And then we start to feel the positive feedback of feeling lighter, or energy, assuming we're on the right track. And really, most people don't have adverse effects from eating a really clean diet and cutting out the more inflammatory foods. So the vast majority of the time, even if there's not prominent food sensitivities, people feel better. They feel lighter, they feel more energetic. But the way to make it less intimidating is to look at it not as, like with my program, doing a full elimination diet start to finish is 7 weeks, but the elimination phase is 11 days to a max of 3 weeks if we're stretching that out. If we're not noticing a shift by the 11-day mark, we persist a bit longer. I only have people commit to that. I usually say 2 weeks, let's give this a go, let's do an experiment. If you notice a shift, at that point, you're going to want to continue on and it's the testing back in that takes time, but that's the easy part, because people get really excited about that and they want to see if a food is reactive, you're bringing in foods back into your diet. And so yeah, it's that. I wouldn't say it's cost. I mean, the grocery bill can be a bit more with buying, all the veggies and the meat compared to some of the more processed stuff. I will give information on my program. That is only $147. So that's not a stumbling point for most people. There's a ton of value in there. I do have a separate one as well called the Real Food Recharge. That's less of a deep dive. It's gluten-free, dairy-free, with an egg-free option, and that's can be more approachable for people if they're wanting to do something but maybe still feeling like they want to take a step in. But yeah, it's the comfort, and I get that. So
Kimberly, for folks that may not have a naturopathic doctor yet, or are uncertain of how to find a naturopathic doctor to help them through this testing or process, is there anything you can guide them with that?
Yeah. I feel like everyone should have a naturopathic doctor, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but basically, depending on where you live, naturopathic medicine may or may not be regulated. So you definitely want to make sure that you're working with a regulated, licensed naturopathic doctor. There is a website. I can basically, it might make sense for you to contact me, and then I can let you know based on where you're at if naturopathic medicine is regulated or not. I will also, I'm just gonna pop this.
Because it's different in different states and provinces, right?
It is, yeah. And so I practice in British Columbia, where Mountain Trek is. I'm in BC, and I can work with anyone in this province. I can also work with people in unregulated, unlicensed states and provinces. So if that's where you are, I can work with you. If you are in a licensed state or province, I can't, but then there are very likely great options there for you to work with people as well. Anyone can do my program. There's no restrictions around that. That's available to anyone in the world. So if you're wanting support in an online program base, then that is all available. And I can put the links in the comments here too for you. I've got tons of information on my blog, but as far as finding a naturopathic doctor, I just put a link into the comments here, and you can see based on where you live if naturopathic medicine is licensed or regulated, in which case you can find the licensing board, the college or the association in your state or province, and there should be a list of people often with their kind of practice focus and whatnot to guide you there. And if you're in any of the other three that says not regulated, pending, push for regulation, then check in with me, and perhaps that might be a good fit. I do everything remote, but yeah, hopefully we can point you in the right direction there.
Yeah, please do put your contact in the chat so people have that. And everyone who's interested, grab that before this meeting ends so you have it. I have a couple last questions, and I think we'll let everyone go for the night. So the first one is, Kimberly, you said that the elimination diet isn't necessarily about giving up something. It's about having control over it. And expecting and understanding the response. And so this might be a question for both yourself and Kirk. Once you've done the elimination diet and you find out that perhaps your favorite snack or your favorite dessert is something that you're sensitive to or intolerant to, what's a great mindset to have around either the stress around completely eliminating that or the approach to indulging in it mindfully?
I like that question a lot. I put way too much contact info in there, but I put all my websites and then my email and everything there. The mindset piece, Kirk, do you mind if I roll on this part?
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So a few things. Again, I'm not all or none. I believe in enjoying what you're eating and not feeling guilty about it. So clarity, first and foremost. If you know something is reactive and you want to eat it anyways, make a conscious choice and enjoy it. But I do encourage people also to start tuning into thinking about not only how food feels, makes you feel when you're eating it, but how it's going to make you feel after eating it. And this is where there's positive reinforcement when people are going through something like an elimination diet and watching their symptoms go away and feel better. And then you start to actually be drawn more towards the foods that are making you feel good, which is very, very helpful. Your cravings change. But then we start to see, like, if you're having foods and you're not feeling good after, it's I don't want to say it takes away from it being your favorite food, but your taste buds shift. And so the more I find when I'm working with my patients, they have repeated experiences of thinking they love the pizza and it's their favorite food, and then they feel bloated and tired for 3 days after eating the pizza. They're like, okay, maybe I can rejig this pizza to make it still taste just as great, but it's not triggering me in this inflammatory way. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense.
Great, thanks. Okay, I kind of lied. I have two questions still because we're getting a little bit of a theme. I've had a few questions on the same thing. Are there supplements that tackle inflammation? Or is that just asking for a magic pill? Is it the building blocks that lead to inflammation?
Yeah. So there are supplements that can tackle inflammation. So things people might have heard of are like curcumin, or there's herbs like boswellia that can decrease inflammation. At the end of the day, I mean, if we have something that's coming in, especially every single day, that's causing inflammation, I don't see that the same results. I don't see that we overcome the inflammation by, we're trying to neutralize it basically with a supplement. And so where it can be more helpful is if we're dialing in the diet and reducing inflammatory triggers for the most part. Maybe we're talking 80-20, 90-10 is amazing if we get there. But if we shift what the bulk of your diet looks like, so we're eating foods that you enjoy but are making you feel good, then when you are having those days that are, I don't even like calling them cheat days, because again, it's being intentional and it's just it's choice. It's not a cheat. And so there's things we can do though. Digestive enzymes actually is one thing that can be helpful once we have that clarity. Doing a good digestive enzyme that maybe has additional support for breaking down the proteins in foods like gluten and dairy that can actually be most helpful. There's a place for sure for anti-inflammatory supplements. Sometimes we just need more support with that, especially if there's been longer term inflammation, but I don't like relying on it without looking at the other factors.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a compounding effect of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, final thing, and I appreciate David for asking this because it's a little bit of a plug for us. So he asked, the diet at Mountain Trek Health Retreat, is it similar to an elimination diet?
Yeah, the Mountain Trek diet is great. So really anti-inflammatory diet. And again, it's I know the approach at Mountain Trek, it's similar to mine. It's not about restriction. It's about bringing in food that's going to fuel your body and taste great, so it's sustainable. And then, keeping out the ingredients that are driving that immune reactivity for the majority of people. So there's, when they look at what's called the anti-inflammatory diet, which is more of a Mediterranean approach diet, it happens to be low in a lot of the food sensitivities. It's not full on restricting them, but it really sets your body up for optimal performance. And Mountain Trek is doing a fabulous job with
Great.
that.
And then the final plug, you guys, if you do want a weekend of eating like this, and you happen to be on the Pacific coast or you're in the mountains, please join us this coming weekend for our virtual weekend retreat. We still have 2 spots left. It starts on Friday. So if you are again on the west side, consider joining us, and you'll get an entire weekend of working with Kirk. You'll work with our yoga instructor. You'll eat just like this. We give you the menu, send you the shopping list. Joan and David will be there, so you can hang out with them. So yeah, please consider, if you want more information, you can email me or you can find it on our website. Other than that, I think we should let Dr. Kim go after this. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone, please, if you're interested, do check out the information that Kimberly put in the chat and reach out to her. She's a fabulous resource. And thanks also, Kirk, for your time tonight.
Pleasure. So nice to see everybody.
Yeah, really great to see everyone. Thank you very much. And please, let me know if you have any
Well,
questions or if I can support you.
We'll be
Thank
back
you,
in about a month.
All right.
Yeah, we'll be back in a month.
Okay. Good seeing everyone. Enjoy your night.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.